Good morning, everybody. I wanted to touch on Romans chapter 9 here. And before I get started, I want to say that this is going to circle back around to free will a little bit. But free will and the fact that human beings do not have a free will is a difficult truth to come to terms with for a lot of people, for me included, especially as we walk through our own life, because it's God that created our inmost being. He formed us in our mother's womb and planned each detail and day of our lives and wrote them down in his book before one of them ever came to be. But he intimately knows our being, our inmost being, because he created it. And then he had us born at a certain time and place, gave us parents, people around us, and all of our circumstances. Some people didn't have two parents around or any parents around, or they might have had different circumstances depending on the person. But every person is created uniquely by God and given circumstances in their life. And when those things come together, our inmost being and the circumstances of life, we make certain choices. And we move through the struggle of making choices and the emotion of making those choices as we move through life. But God stands outside of it all as He put the plan together and every detail together, like I said, before we were even born. So we move through life in real time, and all this stuff comes new to us, and we're not always aware of the circumstances and our inmost being that are working to cause us to make decisions. We just think we make choices. Oh, I want to go get a cup of coffee, or I want to date this girl. We're not aware of all the influences that are put in place that we might not even be conscious of. Spiritual entities, negative ones, can also affect us, and we can't even know it. But God controls all of that. So when He stands in His absolute realm, He puts us through this because He planned it. But as we move through it, we can't feel God's sovereignty. We just have to know by faith that it's there. And that's not always the easiest thing to do. For example, if I woke up one morning and was debating on whether to go out for breakfast and get a cup of coffee or to just stay inside, and I went back and forth. It was a little struggle, not a big deal, but I ultimately ended up going out and getting the cup of coffee and having breakfast. And let's say I met someone there that gave me an idea of a job that I might want to have. So I came back home and I researched it, and I ended up applying to this job, and I got this job. But in order to get this job, I had to move to Ireland. And so that was a huge struggle. I had to debate whether to move to Ireland, leave my friends, go to a foreign country where I don't know anybody. That's a struggle that went back and forth. This didn't really, I did live in Ireland for a while, but I'm just giving a hypothetical here. But the struggle and the emotion you would go through moving away from your family to go to a new job or whatnot, all this stuff that plays into making decisions like that, we know what plays into our tough decisions. We go through that emotion, but it was never up to chance for God. If He created you from the beginning and said, "You're going to Ireland," that's part of the plan, then the decision, even though we think it could go either way and we're working through the emotion of that decision, we know once that decision's made, that was always the plan of God. So God's plan can never be thwarted. If He planned you to go to Ireland, you're going to Ireland. But we, as we move through the emotion and the real time of making that decision, especially right before we make that decision, we believe it can go either way. But whatever way we choose, that was the way destined by God before the beginning of time, because he's outside time. He's not moving through it in the same way we are. So let's say I move to Ireland and meet a girl. Okay, now there's this girl, and now I'm kind of debating whether to go back home after a few years or stay here in Ireland and marry this girl. All the emotion that goes through that. You make the choice to, let's say, get married. Okay, now you have kids. And let's say your kids go off and do great things and all that. Now, God has a plan for your children. And he has always had a plan for your children since the beginning of time. So your struggle to decide whether you're going to get married or not and whether you're going to have kids, those kids already have a life planned out for them by God in the absolute realm. So even though you go through the struggle where you might get married, you might not, you might have kids, you might not, there was never in doubt for God. Even though as you move through it, there were huge doubts because you didn't know what you were going to do. So it's the difference between us moving through things and relating to the things around us as we go through it in real time, and God standing in the absolute sense, planning it all. And the drama that unfolds is for us to learn things and to get closer to God. And God will one day use those experiences to enhance our joy and understanding of God himself. But he doesn't go through it in the same way we do because he planned it. He knows what's going to happen because we live and move and breathe in him. So we can't step out of what he has planned for us. Okay, so with this beautiful girl, say we went on a vacation. So we got married, had kids, went on a vacation one day to the Bahamas, and I was again debating on whether I was going to get a cup of coffee for breakfast while my wife was sleeping. And I decided, maybe I shouldn't, maybe I should. I decided to go when I get hit by a bus. And that's the end of my life. All of this chain of events happened because I originally got that first cup of coffee. So all these details, God is in control of. He's in control of the little details because those little details lead up to big events in life. Big events in life just don't happen. They're planned out. And every detail along the way, we move through and struggle and make decisions. And we don't feel like we're being controlled. And that's part of our experience. So it's easy to take pride in our choices or to get down on ourselves because of our choices, because we go through the struggle and we on one hand choose this and on the other we choose this, and if it's wrong or it's a poor decision, then we suffer the consequences. And I should have done that. So as we move through, we feel all that and we feel free. We're not aware of all the influences of our past, our inmost being, or even spiritual influences that are all coming into this. But having a free will means that you're not influenced by anything. And no one can be there as a human. We are all influenced, and we bow down to the greatest influence in our life, whether we know it or not. But God is outside of that. So in Romans chapter 9, verses 11 through 13, talking about Jacob and Esau here, for not as yet being born, nor putting anything good or bad into practice, that the purpose of God may be remaining as a choice, not out of acts, but of him who is calling. It was declared to her that the greater shall be slaving for the inferior, according as it is written, Jacob I love, yet Esau I hate. So this is Jacob and Esau. Jacob, later named Israel, was the grandson of Abraham. And Esau was the firstborn. These were twins in Rebekah's belly. Esau is the firstborn, so he should have had the blessings and the birthright and all that. But before either of them were born, before they did anything good or bad, Paul says, God set their destiny. He said that the younger will be ruling over the older, which is a flip flop. But God had determined that before they were even born, before they did anything good or bad. And then Paul takes it a step further. He keeps saying that the reason this was done to show that it was a choice of God, not out of acts, not out of anything Jacob and Esau did, because it was before they were born, nothing good or bad, but it was because of God who is calling. God who is calling them to a certain destiny. And if we look back at Romans 8, verse 30, it talks about God calling believers. Now, whom he designates beforehand, these he calls also. So every detail of life that led up to God calling a believer has been planned out. So if God chose, like he did Jacob and Esau, before they were even born, before we were even born, he decides who will believe and who will not believe, what they will do and what they won't do. So if you believe in Jesus Christ, God causes things in your life and details to come about that means eventually one day you will come to believe the things you need to believe. And if you weren't chosen to believe, then your life will unfold with specific details that will cause you not to believe these things. But it's all planned and set by God. And if you look further here in verses 16 and 17, it says, I shall be merciful to whomever I may be merciful, and I shall be pitying whoever I may be pitying. Consequently, then, it is not of him who is willing. So even if you're willing and wanting to do things, that's not where this comes from, nor of him who is racing, but of God the merciful. So it's God that does it. For Scripture is saying to Pharaoh that for this self same, I'm not going to have time for that. I'm going to maybe go on to that in another video. But looking back on Jacob and Esau, it was planned before they were born that Esau would serve Jacob. Now think of all the things that happened in their life to make this come about. The deception, the lies, the interaction between Jacob and Esau. Esau was created as a hunter, man of the field. He would go out and hunt game. He was a very hairy man. Jacob was more kind of a mama's boy and stayed in. And they were very different. And their personalities and how they were created played into their destiny. Because Esau went out to the field and went hunting one day, and he came back and he was starving and he wanted something to eat. And he asked Jacob to give him something to eat, and Jacob said, okay, I'll give you something to eat if you sell me your birthright. And he ended up doing that because he wanted food. So that was kind of shady by Jacob, but Esau did give up his birthright for food. But that, however you think of that experience is up to you. I mean, I'm not going to go that in depth to it, but there was a emotion and interchange there. And Jacob's mom, Rebecca, liked Jacob more or loved Jacob more than she loved Esau. So that played into it, and she helped him put together a plan when Esau was gone to dress up like Esau and go into Isaac's room when he couldn't see very well and pretend to be Esau, so he received the blessing from Isaac. And then when Esau came back, he didn't have that blessing anymore because Jacob stole it. So there was deception there. And there's anger and emotion that Esau felt. And I guarantee that they felt like they had a free will, especially when someone wrongs you. Think about the emotion that Esau must have felt when he was wronged by his brother. Think of when someone wrongs us. We think, oh, they made that decision. We don't rest in the fact that it's all of God. At least that's a hard thing to do sometimes. And it's a hard thing when we make decisions. But ultimately, we have to understand that we move through this, whether it's sin that we commit or sin that other people commit against us, we move through that emotion. It's a process of learning that will all be made right at the cross. and we'll all have a greater appreciation of each other, a greater love and appreciation for God because we move through it in real time, where God from the very beginning created that plan, and each and every emotion and thought and avenue and difficulty just in order to bring about the greatest possible life and experience with Him imaginable that we can't even imagine because we went through it and because He specifically planned that for each of our lives. He's in control of it all, even though we don't feel it.